The tension in the studio built long before the cameras even started rolling. Producers hurried back and forth with clipped voices, adjusting cue cards, whispering about timing, repositioning chairs, anything to keep the atmosphere steady. But there was an undeniable heaviness to the room, a sense that something unpredictable hovered just beneath the surface. Joy Behar, sitting at the center of the table with her reading glasses perched low on her nose, seemed particularly restless. She tapped the edge of her cards repeatedly, glanced toward the backstage curtain, sighed dramatically, and muttered something under her breath that no one could fully hear but everyone sensed wasn't flattering. Johnny Depp, still backstage, wasn't oblivious to the whispers either. He stood in front of the makeup mirror, adjusting the cuffs of his black jacket, rolling the silver rings on his fingers the way he always did when he was preparing to step into a space he didn't entirely trust. He had done talk shows countless times, but The View carried a different kind of unpredictability. The show thrived on friction, and Joy Behar, well, even Johnny knew she didn't disguise her sharpness for anyone. A production assistant poked her head into the room, telling him they were ready for him, and Johnny gave a small nod, exhaling slowly before walking toward the stage. When he emerged through the curtain, the audience erupted with cheers loud enough to shake the rafters. Johnny waved, offered a small, genuine smile, then took his seat beside Joy as the cameras went live. Sunny Hostin leaned forward to welcome him, her tone warm, and Whoopi offered her typical calm presence. But Joy, from the moment Johnny sat down, felt different, alert, pointed, hungry in a way that hinted she had an angle she was preparing to press. Johnny had barely finished his polite greeting before Joy leaned in with a smirk. "So, Johnny," she began, her voice syrupy and unmistakably baited, "do you feel like you've cleaned up your reputation yet, or are we still in the work-in-progress phase?" The air thinned. The audience reacted with a mix of gasps and scattered awkward laughter. Johnny blinked slowly, taken aback not by the question, he had expected jabs, but by how quickly she had charged in. He gave a small tilt of his head, studying her with subtle amusement. "Well," he replied, voice calm and even, "I suppose that depends on who's keeping score, doesn't it?" Joy chuckled, but the sound carried tension, not humor. "I just think," she continued, "that when you choose to air out your personal life in a grand public spectacle, you can't be surprised when people have opinions. That's how it works, Johnny. Cameras go on, drama goes public." Johnny folded his hands, leaning back slightly. "Joy, with respect, I didn't choose for any of it to become a spectacle. Life gets messy. Yours must too, occasionally." Joy's eyebrows shot up as the audience oohed softly. Sunny glanced toward Whoopi, who already had her hand halfway raised in case she needed to jump in. But Joy wasn't retreating. She lifted her chin, voice sharpening. "Well, my messes don't involve global courtroom broadcasts, fan armies, or..." Johnny cut in gently, "Your messes involve arguing with your co-hosts every morning on national television. We all have our own arenas." The crowd reacted louder this time, sending a ripple of energy across the studio. Joy's lips pursed, and she sat upright, bristling. "You know, Johnny, you're charming, sure, but don't think you can come in here and deflect with a joke and suddenly you're the victim." Johnny's expression remained unchanged, but something in his eyes cooled. "I'm not claiming victimhood. I'm just pointing out that everyone here has their own storms. Mine just happen to interest the media more than yours." Joy scoffed loudly. "Well, forgive me for not bowing to your tragic hero narrative." Whoopi leaned forward. "Okay, let's." But Johnny spoke first, his tone losing its softness. "Joy, you invited me here. You asked me to talk about the project I'm working on, yet you're digging at the past like it's your personal jackpot. If you want to have a real conversation, I'm here. If you want to poke for headlines, then I'm afraid you're going to be disappointed." The audience erupted again, half in shock, half in thrilled disbelief. Joy stared at him, her jaw tightening, her fingers gripping the edge of her card stack. She opened her mouth, ready to fire back, but Johnny continued before she could. "And just so we're clear," he added, voice lower and firmer, "your job might be to provoke reactions, Joy, but mine isn't to play the puppet in anyone's scripted drama." Joy leaned forward, her tone clipped and defensive. "Nobody's scripting anything, Johnny. I'm asking the questions people want to hear answers to." "No," Johnny corrected softly, "you're asking the questions you want to stir trouble with." An electric, humming silence settled over the studio. Even the crew froze. The entire exchange had shifted from mildly uncomfortable to a slow-motion collision that no one could look away from. Joy gave an incredulous laugh, shaking her head as though she were the one being unfairly attacked. "You know what?" she said, pointing her pen at him. "If you can't take heat, you shouldn't be sitting in that chair." Johnny straightened, meeting her gaze without hesitation. "Heat is fine. Disrespect is something else." The audience murmured, feeling the temperature spike. Joy's nostrils flared, and she looked toward the producers off camera, as if silently demanding backup. None came. The other hosts sat frozen, torn between intervening and letting the exchange run its natural course. Johnny sat quietly now, hands folded, demeanor unchanged except for the hardened edge in his voice. Joy shifted in her seat, clearly unsettled by the fact that he wasn't bending, wasn't retreating, wasn't intimidated in the slightest. The studio went silent for a split second after Joy shoved her chair back, the kind of silence that felt like someone had pulled the plug on all sound, all movement, all oxygen. The audience froze mid-gasp. The host stared wide-eyed. The stage manager's hand hovered over his earpiece like he expected someone to give an immediate command and no one did. Joy stood there with her hands gripping the edges of the table, her face a mix of outrage and disbelief, like she couldn't decide whether she was more furious at Johnny or more stunned that she'd actually stood up in the middle of a live broadcast. Johnny didn't move. He sat perfectly still, his expression unreadable, but his posture steady, almost eerily calm. He watched Joy with the kind of quiet observation that only made her angrier, as if his refusal to react was fueling her eruption. The other host stayed frozen for a moment before Sunny finally whispered something like, "Oh my God," under her breath. Whoopi, always the one forced to step in when chaos brewed, lifted her hands in an attempt to settle things. "Joy," she started carefully, "sit down, let's take a moment, okay? We're live, Anne." Joy spun toward her, eyes blazing. "I know we're live, Whoopi. That's the point." Her voice cracked with frustration. "I'm sitting here trying to run a show, and she jabbed a finger toward Johnny, thinks he can come on, lecture us, and play the sage philosopher while dodging everything." Johnny exhaled slowly, finally rising from his seat with deliberate calm. He didn't stand aggressively or abruptly, he simply rose in a way that shifted the energy completely. The audience seemed to lean in, unable to look away. Johnny adjusted the ring on his finger, ran a thumb along the side of it, and spoke with controlled clarity. "Joy," he said, "I didn't lecture you. I responded to you. There's a difference. And if you're going to dish out sharp questions, you have to expect sharp answers." Joy laughed sarcastically. "Oh, please. Spare me your poetic metaphors." Johnny lifted an eyebrow. "That wasn't poetic. That was plain common sense." The crowd reacted with a low murmur, half thrilled, half nervous. Joy ran a hand through her hair, pacing a half step back from the table like she needed to move or she'd explode. She pointed at Johnny again, voice shaking with a mix of indignation and adrenaline. "You don't get to come onto my show and call me disrespectful," she snapped. Johnny gave a small nod as though he'd expected exactly that line. "Then don't be disrespectful." The audience let out a collective gasp so loud it felt like another shockwave rolled through the studio. Joy looked ready to combust. She stepped forward, fists clenched, face flushed in pure disbelief. "Who the hell do you think you are?" she demanded, voice rising. "You can't just..." Whoopi finally raised her voice, loud enough to rupture the standoff.